Today I'm going to show you how to use Google Tag Manager's debug tool, or its preview tool, or its tag assistant, whatever you want to call it. This tool is useful for when you're wanting to create a trigger in your Tag Manager account, but you don't know how to fire that trigger, so it helps you find the variables that you can use to initiate that trigger. And it's also useful for verifying that any tags and triggers that you have set up are actually firing correctly. So I'm going to show you how to use the debug tool for these two purposes. So let's dive into my Tag Manager account. Okay, so I'm in my Tag Manager account right now, and let's say that we want to set up some event tracking on this page here. Now this is just a blog post on my website. You can see it's a nice and long blog post with a bunch of text and images. It's also got an embedded video here. Typically I'll set up event tracking on a landing page that'll be used for lead generation as part of an advertising campaign, but we'll be able to demonstrate using this page instead. So my goal here is to try and understand what people are doing on this page once they visit it. Are they clicking on certain things that I think are important, certain links or certain call to action buttons? Are they watching videos? There is some information that we can pull from analytics if we simply install our Google Analytics container onto this page, but a lot of the more interesting and helpful events we actually have to set up manually using Google Tag Manager. So let's say in this example, I'm curious how many people click onto this logo in the top left corner. That's for some reason a high value event that I want to track. And I don't know how to trigger this event in Google Tag Manager. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how Tag Manager works, I've created another video that goes into detail on how to get started, how to install it, what tags, triggers, and variables mean. So you can click either above in the cards or in the description below to learn more about that. But assuming you have a base level knowledge of how to use Tag Manager, let's first try and understand how we can use the debug tool to fire an event when somebody clicks onto this logo. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is click on preview. So this opens up the tag assistant or the debug tool. And the first thing we're going to do is insert the URL that we want to test. So that opens that URL in a new tab. In the bottom right corner, we see this dialog that says the debugger was connected. We have this blue circle. So if we go back to the tag assistant, we can see it's also connected, and we have that blue circle to verify that that's the page it's connected to. So the first thing we can see at the top is it discovers two different Google containers. The first one is GTM, or Google Tag Manager, and then the second one is Google Analytics. So this is the analytics container that's installed on this particular site that I'm looking at. We're going to focus on the GTM container. On the left-hand side, we have, first of all, a summary. So if you have multiple pages that this debug tool is connected to, it'll show you a summary of every page that you're currently looking at. At the moment, we just have this one page. And so this gives us a summary of all of the tags that either have or have not been fired up until this point, since the debug tool has been opened. If I click onto this blue circle, that's going to give us a summary of all of the tags that have been fired on this particular page. As you can see, the only tag that has been fired so far is GA, that's Google Analytics. And then there's this tag below, which is not being fired. Underneath of that, we have three different events. So these are all of the events that Google Tag Manager so far has recognized that have happened since this page has been loaded. If I click onto this first one, container loaded, we can see that that particular event triggered the Google Analytics tag to be fired. If I click onto this second one, no tags were fired because of that particular event. And then this third one, no tags were fired as well. And then again, if I click on this top level, it's going to show us a summary of everything that's happened so far. And so I haven't actually done anything on this page yet. I haven't clicked, I haven't scrolled. So by default, these three events are going to happen whenever a page loads. And so if I click onto this first one, container loaded, and then I click onto this GA tag that was fired, it's going to open up this dialog that gives me some information about what exactly happened. So first of all, it's giving information about that specific tag. In this case, it's using the Google Analytics GA4 configuration. So if I go back to Tag Manager, I'm in the tag section, I click on New, and then I click on Tag Configuration. Gives us a bunch of options for different tags to use. So in this case, it's using the Google Analytics GA4 configuration. If I go back, you can see that's the value there. So the firing status is succeeded. So whatever the trigger was that caused this tag to happen, those conditions were met. So this is just telling us that this tag was successfully fired. And then these are just other settings that we configure inside of this specific tag configuration. The measurement ID of the Google Analytics container, and then another setting that we turned to true when we were setting up this particular tag. Below it, we can see the firing trigger that caused this tag to happen. So the trigger title is all pages, and we can see the different conditions that have to be met in order for this trigger to actually happen. And so in this case, The event is just a page view, so whenever somebody visits any page on this site, it's going to fire this tag. And so that's why this tag was fired when this first event happened, the container loaded. That caused the page view to trigger, which also caused this tag to fire. So basically, by clicking into this tag, we can see what exactly happened. Did it successfully fire, and why did it fire? Now, if we click onto this tag that was not successfully fired, we can see here, not fired. So again, this is information about the specific tag that we're firing. In this case, it was a Google Analytics event. So we wanted to register an event in our Google Analytics account when somebody opted in to a form on our homepage. You can see that it was not fired. This is the container of the analytics account, and then this is the name of the event that we're pushing into analytics if it is successfully fired. And so below we have the triggering conditions, and so two conditions need to be met. The first one is click. So this is a, if I go back to Tag Manager and I go to Triggers, and then I select New, and then click on Trigger Configuration. These are the different types of triggers that we can use to fire a tag. And you can see in this case, we have a couple different click triggers, which register when people are either clicking on elements on the page or just on hyperlinks. And if I click on all elements, now we have some options to customize this specific trigger. I won't go into too much detail there, but basically this bottom condition for this trigger is saying that a click happened. And the second condition that needs to be met is that the page URL contains this string of text. Thank you. So in this case, this URL does not contain the string of text thank you, nor did we make a click, and that's the reason that this particular trigger didn't happen and this event or this tag did not fire. So I'm just demonstrating how this debug tool can be used as kind of a diagnostic to understand what is happening and why it's happening. Now if I go back to this page and I click on this title here, I just clicked, I go back to the Tag Assistant, now we have another event that's logged inside of this debug tool. So again, we can see that that didn't fire any tags. If I click onto that event, we can see that now this first condition was met because I actually clicked my mouse button. But again, the URL does not contain thank you, so this trigger did not meet the condition and this tag was not fired. Now, if I click on variables inside of this click event that just happened, now I can look at all of the values for all of the enabled variables in my Tag Manager account. And this is how we're going to understand how we can trigger a specific event. So just to be clear here, this first one, again, is the one that we've mentioned a couple times, GTM click. This is just signifying that somebody has clicked their mouse. Click classes, so this is the HTML class of whatever element that we're clicking on. So if I go back to this page, I'm in Google Chrome, so if I right click and say inspect on this title that we just clicked, it's going to open up this tool where we can look at the code. And you can see with this element, which it automatically highlights, the class is title space entry dash title. If I go back here, we can see that that matches the click classes inside the variables here. Now, if I went and clicked on an element on a different part of the page, it would probably have a different click class that would match whatever the source code of that page is. If we scroll through here, we have some other information as well, a lot of which I don't even understand myself, like click element, for example, but you'll start to recognize and understand what some of this means, like click text, for example, Zapier, update spreadsheet row in Google Sheets. So that is simply the string of text that we clicked on in the title. The page URL is this URL at the top here. The page host name is simply the domain name. The page path, so this is everything in the URL that comes after that domain name. The refer, so we opened up this page from Tag Assistant, so that's why this is the referrer of that traffic. And then we have some other variables as well related to scroll depth. So that particular event, clicking on this piece of text, had nothing to do with scrolling down the page, nor did it have anything to do with these video variables. Now, if you're not seeing any of these or some of these variables, if you go back to our Tag Manager account and click on variables, it's probably because you don't have them enabled. So by default, Tag Manager enables a certain number of variables. So we can click on continue or configure. And then these are all the different variables that we can actually enable or disable and actually track. So by default, I don't think any of the click variables or the video variables or the scrolling variables are enabled. They'll be unchecked. So I like to go in and make sure that these are checked, and that allows us to collect this information on the page. Otherwise, these will not be here, and we won't be able to use these to potentially trigger tags in the future. Okay, so now we want to figure out how to create a trigger when somebody clicks onto this logo. So I'm going to hold the control key and click onto the logo so it opens in a new tab and it doesn't disconnect the debugger tool. I'm going to go back to the tag assistant, and we can see now it fired two different events. So the first one is just a click event, so just clicking on any element, and then the second one is a link click. So because that particular click had a hyperlink to it, it's actually a separate event that we can track. And so that alone is already helpful information, because if we go back into our account and go to triggers and create new, and then click on trigger configuration. So we can see here we have two different click options. One is clicking on all elements, so that would be anything that doesn't have a hyperlink, any kind of like piece of text or container on the page, and then just link, so anything that has a hyperlink, right? Those are the two different options for creating a trigger based on a mouse click. And if we go back into our tag assistant, we can see that this one here is the all elements click, and then this is the link click. So there's two possible ways that we could initiate this trigger when somebody clicks on the logo. You can also see that we now have this second window here, and if I open up that new tab, we have the red circle. That's the home page. That's where that logo button or link goes to. That matches this page here. So we have two pages now open that are connected to our debugger, and we can actually look at the events happening on both of those pages at the same time. So I'm just going to minimize this one, and I'm going to go into this click first. And you can see obviously right now we don't have any tags set up for when people click on that logo, but if I click on variables, now we can take a look at the different variables, and what we're looking for is something that might be unique to when people click on that specific button. So obviously if we created a trigger that said the domain or the page host name was ryan-ferguson.com, that wouldn't make sense, because any click on any page would have that same variable, right? The domain for this site is ryan-ferguson.com, and so any click would cause that trigger to fire. So we want to try and find variables with values that are unique to this specific click. So first of all, it's a click event. That's something we know. We can't use that. That's not unique. Click classes, there's no class on that particular element, although it's possible that we could edit this element in our, the back end of our site to have a unique click class, and that might be one way that we can actually create this unique trigger. When you see stuff like this that's very long and has multiple lines, I find that you can't just copy this and use this as a trigger, even if it might be unique. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it has to do with some of the spacing and the line breaks. But basically copying this and saying, for example, some clicks, and this is click element. And if we said click element was, and then we just copy and pasted this, it's probably not going to work, because there's going to be issues when you have big blocks of text like this, but you could certainly test it. So what I might do is you would copy this, and then under click elements contains, and then you could paste it in there, publish it, go back into the tag assistant, and then click on that logo and see if it actually fires correctly. I've tested it before, and I know this one's not going to work. Again, a few different variables without any values. Click text is undefined. That's also, we can't use anything to trigger this. The click URL is something that could work, and so let's try this. You can see here this is looks like a unique name for this image file that's uploaded to my site, so I'm just going to copy that piece of text, and this is the click URL variable. I'm going to go back in here, and we're going to say logo click is what we're going to name the trigger. Click elements, and click URL contains, and paste that in there. And so we don't want this to be equals to, because it needs to be an exact match. So in this case, I like to just say contains, and make sure I grab a piece of or string of text that is unique to that specific element. Click save. In order to test this, I'm going to create a new tag. And for the sake of testing, I'm just going to add a string of text and just kind of I'm just going to add a random piece of code in there. I'm going to go to triggering, and then select the logo click trigger that we just set up, and then press save. We're going to open that preview tool back up. I'm going to hold control and click on that logo again. I'm gonna select the click element that happened, and we can see now that the tag was fired. So if we click into this, we can see that this is the properties of the tag that we set up. It's a custom HTML tag that we're firing. It fired successfully. This is the HTML code that we added in there as a placeholder. And then this is the firing trigger. So it was a click event which happened. And then the click URL contains cropped RF logo -200x. So in this case, that would be a good way to measure this event. So what you might do, now that we know that that trigger works successfully, now we can actually go into this tag, this logo click tag, and then we can change this custom HTML event to something that's more useful. So for example, if this was like a Facebook conversion event, this is where you would put in your script for your Facebook standard event. So it would be opening and closing script. Let's say this was a lead event, which doesn't really make sense, and then close it. And so that would be, the code, as long as you've got your Facebook pixel installed, which by the way, I've got a video that goes into more detail on how to install your Facebook pixel and set up Facebook tracking events using Tag Manager. So you can click either in the card above or in the description below to watch that video. But if we didn't want to do a Facebook event, we could change this instead by clicking on this. Maybe we wanted to just push this as an event into Google Analytics. So I've got Google Analytics 4 installed on this site, so I would just select GA4 event, select the configuration tag. So this is the Google Analytics property that's installed on my site. This would be the name of the event that I want to be pushed into my Analytics account. So let's say in this case, I would say, we'll call this a button click, even though it's not really a button, button logo. So the name of the button. And then we would press save, and then whenever somebody clicks onto that, it's going to push this event named button logo into our Google Analytics account, and we'll be able to track that and measure that against the total website traffic that's going to that site. If you're interested in learning more about Tag Manager, I've got some links in the description below to a playlist where I have all of my Tag Manager videos, so make sure that you go check those out. Otherwise, I appreciate your time watching, and I'll see you in the next video.